This is part two of the discussion of Towards a Biblical View of Technology and the cultural impact of technology. Okay, well, a lot of my thoughts, at least my thinking about this topic, started when I heard a speech or a presentation given by Shane Hipps, and in there he referenced the book that he had written. And that book I used to be required reading for the MBA program. I've changed that more recently, but I still want to communicate some of the ideas that came forth out of that book. So, some of my thoughts on technology and spirituality. Well, there's this question I asked early on: is technology mostly good most of the time, mostly bad, or does it depend? And I would say for a long time I was in the mostly good. I wasn't thinking critically. And then I think I started to lean more towards the, well, it depends. It depends on how the technology is used. But I've come to realize that maybe that's not the right answer. And before I share, let me go over a couple more slides. So, when we think of this thought, bad, good, or it depends, and maybe let's use the example of TV. Many people think that TV is bad if we're watching Desperate Housewives. Well, I hope there's no Desperate Housewives out there. So let's say watching pornography or something evil, whatever that may be for you. So, well, in that case, if we're watching those kinds of things, whatever those things are for you, then TV is bad. But if we're watching Mr. Rogers and Hello Neighborhood, okay, maybe some of you think that Mr. Rogers was subverting our children. So maybe you want to say the gospel's being preached on TV. Okay, well, maybe you think some of those televangelists are crazy people. Whatever is something good, maybe it's some kind of educational content. That that TV's good when it's dispensing educational content, and it's bad when it's communicating smut. Well, the thing that intrigued me was when I realized, or when I studied, when I found out that the whole time we're watching TV, there's this content that's being communicated, and clearly that is affecting us. But the flickering pixels are creating a different type of stimulation in the neural pathways, and that's creating a different type of experience in our brain, causing our brain to fire a specific way, which causes us to prefer emotion over intellect. So, regardless of what we're watching, we're exercising our brain in a way that's different than other mediums. Well, that's very interesting. I had not thought about that fact. Well, how many of you have a spouse or a friend, or maybe you yourself, would just veg out in a comatose state as you stare into the nothingness of your TV? My wife would say, "Yep, that's Steve. That's what he does." So that's one of the things I'm interested or intrigued by, is the fact that the mediums, especially the information technology forms we use, are shaping our brain in new ways. And that led to this other idea. Marshall McLuhan, again, the medium is the message. This is a term that he coined in the 60s, and Hipps picked up on it. And Hipps said that this idea of the medium is the message. We often hear the term, well, whenever the methods or medium changes, the message, well, no, actually, it's the other way around. We hear that, well, the mediums might change, but the message stays the same. And what McLuhan was saying is, no, that's not true. Whenever you change the medium, you are changing the message in some way. And so there's a quote from McLuhan where he says, I am in the position, let's see, I have it right here. I am in the position of Louis Pasteur telling doctors that their greatest enemy was quite invisible and quite unrecognized by them. Our conventional response to all media, namely that it is how they are used that counts, is the numb stance of the technological idiot. I love that. That's me, the technological idiot. For the content of a medium is like the juicy piece of meat carried by the burglar to distract the watchdog of the mind. Powerful imagery there in that sentence. And maybe a bit overstated, but again, a really interesting idea to think about. To what extent is the medium shaping us more than we think? So, McLuhan asserts that the content follows form such that each new medium, each new technology has the potential to carry with it changes. And it will change the way we think and the way we feel. And again, I think sometimes it seems as though McLuhan and Hips, in likewise fashion, overstates his case. But I think maybe they do this because we as a society have understated the case. We've thought about this, and so they need, like a lot of prophets do, they need to fire this warning out really strong so that we think about it. We consider this idea that the medium is shaping us in much greater extent. Maybe it isn't the message, but it's at least way more of the message. So, you could say, well, if I tell my wife that I love her, or I text her, or I call her on the phone, it's the same thing. Well, is it really? Or when you break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend by text messaging them, are you sending a different message than if you take the time to actually tell them in person? Just wondered. Back to this definition of media or technology. I think just this definition, to me, is worth the whole presentation. This idea of technology being an extension of humanity. It extends or amplifies some part of ourselves. Well, that begs the question, with every technology that we're using, to what extent is this technology extending my ability to do something? Is it extension or is it slavery? Email, for example. In one sense, well, it's extending my ability to communicate to a lot of people, but am I also becoming a slave to that beep, that ringing of my mobile phone every time it goes off? Am I a slave to my work, giving them my most valuable time when I'm there with my family? Well, when we fail to see media this way, we become overly enamored, giving them the power to make us slaves to our own creations. We've created technology. We created it to extend our ability to do things. And are we becoming servants to it instead of it serving us? So, an extension of humanity. Let me give you another example. So, binoculars. Binoculars extend our ability to see further distances. Security cameras extend our ability to feel safe. Nicholas Carr, again, from The Shallows and from the Google Making Us Stupid article, he does an interesting thing where he defines this extension. He breaks it into 4 different categories. He says, well, some technology extends our physical strength. So a bulldozer extends our physical strength. Some technologies extend our senses. So again, the binoculars extend our ability to see. Some technologies help us to reshape nature. So a dam reshapes nature. And then some technologies extend our intellect. And so again, computers and the internet and mobile phones extend our intellect. And it's really that intellectual technologies that Carr focuses on when he talks about Google making and the internet making us stupid or shaping us. So is your technology extending or enslaving? The other thing that the Hips book did, which I liked, was it provided a framework. And so it did have this extension definition, so this question of to what extent does technology enhance enhance? And then it also asked the question, or broke into a number of different categories. When you use the technology, what can it reverse into? What does it retrieve? And what does it obsolesce? Here's an example from page 42. The security camera. A surveillance camera enhances, or it extends, the capacity of the human eye and enhances the feeling of security and eyewitness accounts. It reverses into, so when pushed to the extreme, surveillance cameras reverse into an invasive loss of privacy and a new feeling of vulnerability. Security cameras retrieve the medieval city wall, which both protected and imprisoned its citizens. And then obsolesces. A surveillance camera makes obsolete or changes the function of neighborhood watch groups and oral testimony. So there's an example. And then he had another example. I'll use this because we're talking about electronic culture. So the electronic culture, and this is in the category of enhances, electronic culture intensifies a right brain encounter with God. Corporate approach to faith and our reliance on intuition and experience for knowing God. Reverses into. When electronic culture is taken to an extreme, it reverses into relativism. It also reverses our capacity for abstract thought and critical reasoning skills. It retrieves. Electronic culture retrieves Eastern Orthodox and medieval Catholic spirituality. It is also retrieves the gospel story of Jesus as central to faith. And then it obsolesces. Electronic culture obsolesces our belief in the meta-narrative. It obsolesces our belief that conversion is a one-time binary event. Finally, it obsolesces the role of abstract propositional faith and the full impact of Paul's letters. So again, those are Hibbs's application of this framework. And I wanted to give a couple examples just so you could see, and you might consider taking this approach and thinking through the framework and applying it to technologies. Now we'll go back into some societal impact. This is mostly from Hibbs, but it also comes from some other books and just from paying attention to society at large. So we'll go back to the TV example. And for eons, I mean, our brain was created. We were intended to see bad events and to have anxiety and have stress and to react to that and to become involved. And yet, with TV, now we see natural disasters, and we can see not only natural disasters like Katrina, but we can see terrorist events like 9/11, and we can see those events over and over and over again. How many of you have watched some of those events and just been paralyzed, just stared off into the TV for hours? And maybe you feel like you need to do something. You give some money. Maybe some of you even done missions trips down to deal with the catastrophes with Katrina and otherwise. But we see these events day after day or so frequently on the TV, and you cannot be involved in all of them. So we'll see floods, and we'll see fires, we'll see event after event. And that just leads to anxiety and stress. And so there's lots of studies that have shown our anxiety and stress levels are way elevated from where they were before, and our ability to cope and to deal with them is not like it used to be. It used to be that if there was a fire and the Waltons' barn got burned down, well, the whole city, the whole town would come there and they would help deal with that. And so there's a relieving of that stress because of the help that you provide. And that just isn't there like it used to be. Quentin Schultz wrote a book, and this idea of us being impersonal observers versus intimate participants. And so I had the imagery. Actually, I gave this presentation in Ohio, and so I pulled this image of the Buckeyes, Ohio Buckeyes. And so, here you've got 100,000 fans sitting in the seats, cheering on, thinking that they're somehow actively involved. Well, that's not the same as being one of the 15, in this case, rugby players. And I picked rugby, not to say rugby versus football, but there's a lot that could be said about the camaraderie and the love and even the worship that goes on and the singing that goes on in a rugby team, and how in many ways, that the church could be as tight-knit as some rugby clubs are. But it's a whole nother topic, a whole nother message I could give. Christ and Culture. So Richard Niebuhr wrote an article and a book called Christ and Culture, and it's significantly impacted how Christians look at and interact with culture. There's been some critiques, but many seminaries, including Bethel Seminary, I studied this model at Bethel Seminary, and Bethel's undergrad program in a lot of their gen eds will study this model. And there have been books, again, that have indicated where it's fallen short. And a book called Christ and Culture Revisited, and looking at updating it for the current time frame. I think it's a useful model, and so as I was thinking about this topic, I started to ask the question, could this be a useful model that we could apply towards this idea of technology? So what is the model? Well, basically, and again, I could go into detail here, but I'll just try to quickly identify the 5 different options and then reapply them. So Christ against culture, and here you would have Christ being against culture. So maybe the group that would jump out in your mind would be the Amish, how they separate from culture. And especially if we think of this idea of technology, where the Amish reject technology. But that's not really true. Their response to technology is much more nuanced. They actually don't reject all technology. They ask a different question that I think is a better question than, should I buy this technology because it'll help me? They ask the question, how will any technology impact our society? How will it impact our culture? They're asking a broader question. I think that's a great approach. I could talk more about that and Amish view on technology, but we don't have time at this point. The Christ of culture. And this is the way the vast majority of Americans, at least other than conservative and strongly evangelicals, they just tend to be in culture, and they're not thinking critically of culture and not thinking critically of technology. So while Christ against culture maybe is radical, one direction, I don't want to say left or right, but say on one side, the Christ of culture is kind of radically on the other. And then the last 3 tend to fit more in the middle. And so you have Christ above culture, and here you would be saying that you honor that which is good in culture, that which is good. And so maybe a technology example would be the TV example, where you would say, well, TV is good when it's dispensing, educational content or the gospel, or this movie is about evangelism. It's a Billy Graham thing, so this is a good movie to go see, but we're not going to go see that, shoot 'em dead movie. Then you have the Christ and culture in paradox. And so here, this view has Christ and technology. They both claim our loyalty. And it's not the Christ of culture, because there's a tension between them. But this tension can't always be reconciled. We feel that tension, but there isn't always a reconciliation. So it's not that we're in culture and not dealing with the tension. We feel that tension. And then last, Niebuhr proposed a Christ-transforming culture. And some of the critiques, while Niebuhr indicated Bible verses for all of these, he had very little biblical support for the Christ-transforming culture. This was more by example. And yet I think there's a strong case can be made in the narrative of the Bible about how Christ did transform culture. I didn't talk about this in the Bible, but in the reference that showed the cross and the money, God or money, the cross is really a great example of Christ transforming technology. It was at the cross where, think of the cross being a form of punishment that is about hatred, and it's about murder, and it's about preventing people from uprising. The cross had an evil message to it. But when I think of the cross now, I don't think of that. I think that Christ transformed the message of the cross. I think the cross now represents the greatest love story ever told. I think it's not about hate, it's about love. It's about God's love for us. So Christ transforming culture, the cross, is a great example of that. And so then I just changed this idea of Christ and culture and replaced the word culture with technology, and then asking you to think about, in these 5 approaches, do any of them seem to work better for you? Or is that dependent on the technology? Maybe there's areas where you feel a Christ against technology approach makes sense. And then there's another area where you're thinking about how you can transform technology. So give this some thought, and I hope this is helpful as you think critically about technology. Then what should we do? How do we move towards a solution? So where do we go? I mean, how does all this theological reflection, the models, the cultural critiques, the thinking about the impact of technology, where do we take this? I mean, a detailed answer to this question is beyond the scope of what we can do with even in this 30-40 minutes. But let me provide a brief case. Okay, that's meant to be a little bit funny. What could you do? Well, you could take inventory. You could look at the technologies that you're using, especially those that you're using most often, and you could think about this definition. Is it extending my ability to do things? And then you could apply the framework. To what extent does it enhance? What will it obsolete? What will it retrieve? What will it revert into? And I don't necessarily mean to say that you need to do that for every technology, but definitely for those that you use most frequently. I think it would make sense. From a biblical perspective, what is all of that discussion about trust and idols and loving God and saving humanity versus causing confusion? What does all of that say about the technology that you're using? To what extent does this technology help me to love my neighbor, to love my spouse better? Is this technology becoming an idol for me? Am I putting my trust in it? Then you could consider the medium itself and ask the question, well, if certain mediums shape us, how might this technology be shaping me? And is it a way that I want to be shaped? On the technology and the type of technology that it is, there might be other questions identified in this paper or from other sources that might be helpful. For example, I guess there was my Bible thing. For example, if I'm using a mobile app or if I'm using Facebook, are there internet security questions that I should be asking? Is it a good idea to be using this technology And that, again, could be a whole long presentation all in itself. Hopefully, you're using firewalls and you're making good choices about what you're installing. And then, after all these questions, hopefully, you'll then be able to feel more comfortable that you're making a well informed decision. So, summarizing, and I'll try to be brief. Hopefully, this presentation has provided you with much to think about. It's giving you some thoughts on a possible approach to utilize, and maybe even as I've walked through this biblical and cultural presentation on technology, maybe it's given you some thoughts about how to do a similar thing in your own area of emphasis, your own, role that you play at work. How do you bring more biblical integration into marketing or into sales, and looking at the impact. Hopefully, this specific application of the approach of incorporating numerous Bible verses has got you thinking about your own area. And then hopefully the verses that I gave you make you consider evaluating technology from a biblical perspective. The books and articles, maybe there's a book or article, maybe that Hips book that you're intrigued by now, and you'll go off and buy it and do some more study of your own. I had another quote that from Albert Borgman, where he states that since technology as a way of life is so pervasive, so well entrenched, and so concealed in its quotidianity, Christians must meet the rule of technology with a deliberate and regular counter practice, a radical theology of technology. That's what I'm hopefully presenting here. This radical theology of technology must finally become a practical theology, one that makes room and then makes way for a Christian practice. It's my hope that this presentation has provided the impetus and the tools to develop a theologically based technological counter practice that promotes loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. So, in summary, I believe technology is not good, it's not bad, it doesn't depend. Hopefully, I've presented a case that says technology shapes us. Winston Churchill said, "We shape our homes, we build our homes, we create our homes, and then our homes shape us." And we create our technologies, and then our technologies create us. Again, this idea of understanding the definition, I just think this is so important. If you just get this idea of technology extending our abilities and asking that question, how is this extending my abilities? I think that can be so beneficial. I'm hoping that then you see that technology is supposed to extend. We are not to become a slave. And then you can apply the matrix. So this is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. I can't promise that everything I've presented here is the truth, but I hope you see that I've tried to present a biblical and a social understanding of the impacts of technology. So the matrix I really want you to apply is this enhancing, reversing, retrieving, and obsolescing, and to be thinking about that. I really do want you to think biblically, to apply the Bible in all areas of your life. So now the question is, after this presentation, my views on technology, mostly good, mostly bad, it depends, or something else. Has your answer changed, or has it stayed the same? I'd be really interested in knowing your answer to that, so feel free to email me your answer. And then, what questions do you have? What comments? What pushback do you have? I'd love to interact with you on any of that. I hope this has been helpful and has opened your eyes a bit.